From creepy dolls pointed at their ex-mother-in-law's home to trashing someone's roof using a chainsaw, get ready for even more deliciously passive-aggressive ways people got revenge. Be Amazed viewer Olivia was living with her partner when her friends told her a devastating truth. He was cheating on her. And he'd been mistreating her 2 cats when she wasn't around. Wow, sounds like a real keeper. Cheating was one thing, but he was about to learn a valuable lesson. Never mess with someone's cats. Unsurprisingly, she broke up with him, but to show there were no hard feelings, Olivia gave him some potted plants as a gift before moving out. What a forgiving gesture, or so it seemed. You see, she'd actually secretly buried a ton of fly and spider larvae in the soil, turning the plants into grotesque bio-booby traps just waiting to be sprung. Spiders can be fully grown in as little as 2 weeks, and flies can develop up to 150 eggs a batch in just a few days. Gross. She didn't hear from him again, but the fruits of her labor got back to her while chatting with a mutual friend. Apparently, he'd stopped having people over because of some kind of bug problem. Yeah, that's putting it lightly. But what if you want your payback a little less subtle? Like, say, a chainsaw busting through someone's ceiling. The footage, captured by a neighbor in County Dublin, Ireland, in 2023, shows 32-year-old construction worker Dominic Darcy cutting through the extension he'd built because the owner allegedly refused to pay him. This brash act of revenge only came after Dominic failed to get payment in less abrasive ways. Locals around the area said they saw signs calling out the homeowner for the unpaid work, and apparently Dominic even called, warning that if he didn't receive his money in the next 30 minutes, he'd come over and tear the roof right off. Well, I guess he was as good as his word. The owner took him to court, and if he's found guilty, it's safe to assume Dominic will lose more money than if he'd just taken the initial loss. But that's not what this is about. It's about teaching that homeowner a lesson in cold, petty revenge. One greedy landlord learned a similar lesson after trying to use their former tenant's green thumb to their own advantage. Ex-user Charlotor has a friend who was forced to leave her beloved apartment after her landlord demanded a massive rent increase, which also meant abandoning the luscious garden they'd tended for years. To add insult to injury, the landlord was advertising the apartment using pictures of the garden as a main selling point. So the slighted tenant devised a diabolical plan. When it came time to move out, she carefully dug up every single thing she'd planted, completely ruining the once beautiful garden and leaving straggly grass and bare patches of dirt in its wake. Safe to say, the landlord was horrified when they brought the new tenants round and had to explain why the garden they'd just paid for was a barren mess. Let's just hope our galaxy-brained gardener found a new home for her plants. This next story from another viewer shows what happens when sibling rivalry goes too far. At age 15, Amy had a 12-year-old sister who was the family's golden child, and a total brat. Her younger sister tormented Amy, always stealing her food, makeup, and money. But every time Amy went to her parents, they'd just make excuses, claiming she was only 12 and didn't know what she was doing. One day, her sister ran up to her, holding their dad's expensive watch. Then, with an evil smile, she dropped it on the floor and smashed the whole thing to pieces. Before Amy could even respond, her sister ran off and accused her of breaking it. Amy couldn't do anything to prove her innocence, and to this day, their father still doesn't forgive her. Well, enough was enough. There was an upcoming party at school, and Amy knew exactly how she was gonna get her revenge. The big day arrived, and Amy's sister arrived at the party in her best dress. But rather than the gushing look she was expecting, Everybody walked past and was pointing and laughing at her. At first, she couldn't figure out what was so funny, but then she started to notice a horrible smell. With growing anxiety, she rushed to the bathroom and discovered a massive brown stain on the back of her dress. Ew. It turns out that earlier, Amy had made the nasty mark using the same foundation her sister had stolen from her and then topped it off with a hearty blast of fart spray. The combined effect was very convincing. And to this day, people still call her Poopsie. Still, there are plenty more wild ways to take vengeance on a selfish sibling. Take Reddit user ObsSnotMain. She'd never seen eye to eye with her half-sister Heather, but was getting engaged and felt obligated to invite her to the party. Meanwhile, Heather only saw the invite as an opportunity to one-up the bride-to-be. She sent Obs a picture of what she was planning on wearing, and calling her outfit extra would be an understatement. Despite the dress code being smart casual, she'd bought a fancy white strapless gown with sewn-in crystals and golden accents. Showing up to someone's engagement party in essentially a glitzed-out wedding dress would be a serious slap in the face, and Heather knew it. Obs was furious, but what could she do? Well, that's when she decided to change the engagement party to a costume party. She messaged all her guests about the change, but Heather, she got no message. Instead, Obs told their father to tell her, knowing he'd either forget or say something after it was too late. When the big day came, the guests all began showing up in wacky costumes, from ABBA members to anime characters. The bride and groom themselves came as Bubbles and Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls, but the star of the show was yet to arrive. Swagging in an hour late, Heather wore the same opulent dress she'd shown off earlier. But as soon as she realized her ultra-expensive outfit didn't stand out amongst all the crazy costumes, she exploded. Why were people not giving her all the attention? It was infuriating. However, the final blow came when Ob's fiancé told Heather her dress looked amazing for a cheap costume. Unable to take it anymore, Heather fled the scene crying. Talk about a passive-aggressive power couple. Nothing burns my britches more than people illegally dumping their trash. This construction worker in Dorset, England, knows exactly how I feel. After arriving at work one day, he found a huge pile of trash had been fly-tipped on his freshly cleared site. Ugh, what's wrong with people? Scattered among the garbage, there was a microwave, some cables, and a few garbage bags, but they also discovered a letter with the dumpster's address on it. So they did what any good citizen would, picked up all that trash in their digger and hauled it straight back to the litterbug's house.
Here we are, on the pavement, there we go. Be seeing you. Thank you.
It's enough to bring a tear to my eye, and I'm sure it'll bring a tear to theirs when they smell that heap of trash in their backyard. They say cheaters never prosper. Something Reddit user Low Myope taught his fellow students the hard way while studying at university. He was placed in a group, and together they had to complete an experiment before each writing up a 2,500-word report. Being a good student, Myope submitted his work a couple weeks early, freeing up time for more important things like beer pong. One of his group, however, didn't think so far ahead. She started just 2 days before the due date and called Myope in a panic, begging for him to share his report so she could understand the structure. Without thinking, Myope sent it over and almost immediately regretted it. The night before submission, she gave Myope another call, asking if he could check it over to make sure it's okay. Myope agreed, but was shocked to realize the work was almost identical. Well, he wasn't going to get accused of plagiarism because of his lazy group member. Oh no! How could she have been so moronic to send it back to him when it was a blatant copy? So, Myope made a few adjustments. He started by using the find and replace function to swap a load of commonly used words with swear words. Nice. Then he changed the entire methodology from a scientific process into a step-by-step recipe for spaghetti bolognese. But that still wasn't enough. He altered the data table to last week's football scores and changed all her references to names of Harry Potter characters. As a final cherry on top, he even replaced the conclusion with a confession of her plagiarism. Then he sent her the amended copy and waited for the inevitable phone call. The thing is, it never came. 3 weeks later, Myope heard the news. His lazy peer had submitted the altered version without even checking it. Who'd be stupid enough to do that? Well, I guess someone who'd make no effort to hide their plagiarism in the first place. Once the professors read her mess of a document, they called her into a faculty meeting for academic misconduct. And her attempt to explain the essay's strangeness only reinforced her confession of her original plagiarism. Unsurprisingly, she not only failed the module, but was also under threat of expulsion. Ah, sweet justice. But this story has one last twist. Over 5 years later, Myope learned that teachers at the university still used that report as a warning against plagiarism. That's crazy. Imagine executing your revenge so well that they start teaching it in schools. Speaking of cheating, here's a tip for anyone thinking of having an affair. Don't do it while dating one of the most famous people in the world. Because that's exactly what former soccer player Gerard Piqué went through after breaking up with pop singer Shakira in 2022. The star couple started dating in 2011, and over the next decade they moved in together and had 2 kids. So their breakup came as a shock. But things turned scandalous when Gerard immediately revealed a new relationship with a much younger 22-year-old Clara Chia Marti. Rumors began swirling that Gerard and Clara had actually become an item while he and Shakira were still dating. Well, the pop icon wasn't going to take that sitting down. In a scathing new song with record producer Bizarrap, Shakira sang, "I'm worth 2 22s, and you traded a Ferrari for a Twingo. You traded a Rolex for a Casio." The diss track quickly became a mega hit, surpassing 63 million views on YouTube in less than 24 hours. That must have hurt, but Gerard hit back with a petty media stunt of his own, showing up to work in a $10,000 Renault Twingo and signing a sponsorship deal with Casio. Talk about pulling in Uno reverse. The game of tit for tat took a sinister turn, however, when Shakira put this horrifying witch decoration on display at her Barcelona home. What? You see, the prop faces Gerard's mother's house, her former mother-in-law. Following the breakup, it was rumored that Clara and Gerard's mom started referring to Shakira as the witch. So Shakira was just having a bit of banter with it. Apparently, Gerard's mom didn't see the funny side, though. She started to get worried the singer was using the witch in some kind of, get this, dark ritual. Wait, so she thought Shakira was an actual witch? You couldn't write it. But it's nowhere near as bad as what Michigan local strip club owner and author of The Topless Prophet, Alan Markovitz, did back in 2013. Alan's wife of 2 years, Leah Tui, had just had an affair with another man and moved in with him. Heartbroken, Alan decided the next reasonable step was to buy the house right beside his ex-wife's new place and erect a 12-foot-tall bronze statue of a hand holding up the middle finger aimed directly at her home. The childish statue alone cost Alan a whopping $7,000, and heaven knows how much more the house cost. But it seems no expense was spared. He even has a spotlight trained on it so the massive digit catches the eye 24/7. He'd later tell reporters it was just a coincidence that the house he'd bought was right next to his ex-wife, and that the finger wasn't even targeted her, but her new partner. Yeah, right. See, being a public figure in the adult entertainment industry since the 90s, Alan is no stranger to drama. Over that time, he survived multiple attempts on his life, including getting shot twice and having a mob hit put out on him. Then in 2024, it was discovered he'd been secretly helping federal law officers with multiple criminal cases for decades. So cheating ex? Yeah, I'm sure that was just child's play. Reddit user Sharkbait lived in an apartment where his neighbors would consistently throw crazy midweek parties and keep him and his roommate up all night. Well, after a few relentless weeks of this, they came up with the perfect punishment. First, Shark got a pizza pan. Then there's no nice way to put it, peed inside it and put it in the freezer. Once the neighbor's most recent party had finally died down, he took the now frozen disc of urine, went outside, and carefully slid it under their door. Talk about a pizza delivery. Now, if you know what happens to ice when it's not in the freezer, you know exactly what happened over the following hours. The next morning, Shark and his roommate were both awoken by the sounds of the neighbors loudly arguing over who'd peed on the floor. Little did they know, the real culprit was laughing at them from right next door. Unbelievably, the incident didn't stop them from partying, but they did eventually get evicted. Whether it was over the parties or the suspicious stains, who's to say? Have you ever been queuing for something when the people in front start actively wasting everyone's time? If so, you'll enjoy this next sordid story from Reddit user Welsh_dresser. While she was in line at the gas station, the guy parked at the pumps casually strolled out of the store and toward his van. But instead of getting in and driving away, he started chatting with the man using the pump beside him. More cars joined the line, yet the two carried on talking, and from the looks on their faces, they loved how annoyed everyone was getting. One peeved guy near the front told them to move, but the van man arrogantly laughed in his face, and they continued for another 5 minutes, until eventually getting bored and driving away. But as the van man drove off, Welsh noticed the number for his plastering company was printed on the side of the vehicle. A dastardly plan forming, she jotted it down. A few weeks later, she called the moron and requested a quote to renovate her new house. He was all too happy to take the job, and she gave him her address to come check it out. Except, of course, she hadn't bought a new house and there wasn't any work. She'd actually given him the address of a run-down house a few streets away. The following day, Welsh received multiple missed calls and a voicemail checking where she was. She called later, apologetically explaining that her husband had fallen from a ladder and needed to be taken to the ER, so they booked another date. And once again, when the time came, she was nowhere to be seen. This time, when she called, the guy was noticeably annoyed. To start off, she was super apologetic, but then she said it reminded her of when she was forced to sit and wait at a gas station while some idiotic guy wasted everyone's time. Finally, the penny dropped, and our moronic plasterer was beside himself. Enraged, he belted out a string of obscenities. Meanwhile, it was her turn to laugh in his face. Over the next few weeks, she got abusive texts from various different numbers, but simply blocked them all until the idiot got bored. The only thing that could have made this sweeter is if the van also had his mailing address. I know exactly what I'd send him. Being a parent might be hard work, but it comes with one unbeatable bonus: being able to enact passive-aggressive revenge on your little tykes. One father posted on Reddit about how one Christmas he bought a Nintendo Switch for his two young boys. To nobody's surprise, they went nuts. What a kind gift. Well, they rewarded his kindness later on by using a rock to scrawl their names into the side of his truck. Now, the truck was old and the act was more out of childish boredom than outright malintent, but the poor dad was still very upset. So he did what anyone would do. Got a Sharpie and wrote the word "Dad" in huge letters right across the Switch's glass screen. But before you grab the pitchforks, don't worry. He only really marked the screen protector. The screen itself was totally fine. Not that the kids knew this. So, when they went to play their precious console, well, they were mortified. Dad left it on for a good couple weeks before revealing that the whole thing was a vengeful lesson. And something tells me it's one they're going to remember the rest of their lives. But if you really want to drive home the dangers of messing with another person's stuff, you should take notes from Redditor Aaron Oguku. His mom had invited his agonizing aunt and annoying 8-year-old cousin over for dinner. And while the adults were having coffee, the cousin entered his room and demanded to use the computer. When Aaron said no, he was doing some work, the little brat threw a huge temper tantrum and went crying to his mom, who obviously took his side and started yelling at Aaron. While they argued, the kid climbed onto his desk, grabbed an expensive Gundam figurine off his shelf, and then threw the delicate model to the ground and stomped it to pieces. Aaron exploded with anger. You see, he'd built this particular figurine with his late grandfather, his mom's dad, so it held a lot of sentimental value to both of them. He demanded repayment for his destroyed figurine, but the aunt wasn't hearing any of it, called him a weirdo for playing with toys. Well, enough was enough. Aaron's mom was just as angry as he was, and after that, she was out for blood. So, they took the aunt to court and demanded $1,000 in repayment for the model. But how could they possibly prove that it was her son that had broken it? Well, remember that work that Aaron was doing when the brat barged in? He'd needed his webcam for it. So, he had video evidence of the entire debacle. Suddenly, this trial was an open and shut case. The aunt watched horrified as the clip played out in front of the jury, and the judge ended up making her pay closer to $2,000 plus legal fees. But this was only the start of her problems. Her husband, who was already looking for a good time to get out, took the opportunity to file for divorce. Not only did she lose the down payment she had for a house, but custody of the kid was handed over to her now ex-husband. Yikes. What started as simple payback quickly snowballed into destroying his aunt's entire life. But hey, at least the kid has a chance of being raised to be less of a nightmare. Imagine you've booked an all-expenses-paid vacation and are queuing excitedly at the airport only for your flight to get canceled at the last minute. I'd be pretty damn peeved. Well, that's exactly what tens of thousands experienced in 2024 after a security breach led to Delta Airlines canceling a whopping 17,000 flights. Among the disgruntled passengers were loyal Delta customers Kyle Felipe and his friend Gary Keelan, who had expected to be traveling to Ecuador. Delta did offer to rebook their flight and reimburse them $100 each, but this didn't even come close to covering the thousands they'd lost from pre-booked vacation plans. Begrudgingly, the pair accepted the offer, but they were determined to get their pound of flesh, or more accurately, their pound of oversized cookies. See, they both had memberships to the exclusive Delta Sky Lounge, essentially a cafe/restaurant inside the airport that offers complimentary food and drink to paying members. Hitting the buffet table, both men gorged on as much free food as they possibly could. We're talking ribs, potato chips, coffee, cookies, brownies, popcorn. If it was available, they had it, and a hell of a lot of it. They even ordered glasses of wine only to pour them in the trash. Then, when they'd consumed as much as possible, they made sure to clean up with hand sanitizer and a nice long shower. Granted, without actually stepping inside. Before uploading their grand act of passive aggression to TikTok, where it amassed over 177,000 likes and almost 25,000 shares. And while the food and water costs might just be a drop in the bucket for Delta Airlines, I'm sure the viral payback felt good, assuming it didn't all come back up mid-flight. In spring 2024, an anonymous Reddit user who I'll call Daniel had some new neighbors move in who seemed intent on making his life a living hell. Almost every evening while Daniel was out relaxing on his porch, one of them, Pete, would drive his Mustang up and down the street, revving it like some kind of Fast and the Furious wannabe who never got the call back. To make things worse, he'd removed the muffler, so it was absolutely deafening. Talk about a waking nightmare. Unsurprisingly, Daniel wasn't the only one exhausted by the noise. Everyone on the road was in a homeowners association group chat and kindly requested that Pete stop. Well, this is the response they got. "I pay a lot of money for this house. I'll do what I want in my own yard." That's one way to make friends. With that flat-out rejection, Daniel felt totally justified in getting some well-deserved retribution. But how would he do it? Then a devious plan came to mind. You see, in the 15 years he'd lived there, he'd discovered that if he put a fire pit near the neighbor's fence, the smoke would float over and completely engulf their property. Because of this, he'd moved it away from his original neighbor's property years earlier, but after Pete showed no regard for his own community, he decided he liked it better back where it was. Over the next 2 days, he worked tooth and nail digging up the fire pit and moving it back to where it had been before, right next to Pete's house. Then he waited until he heard Pete and his wife having guests in their backyard. Seizing the moment, he rushed to light a fire in the pit before feeding it the wettest, grossest wood he could find. In just 10 minutes, there was so much thick, pungent smoke drifting over into Pete's yard that they were forced to retreat inside. But things were far from over yet. After keeping the fire going all night, he made a post on the HOA Facebook page requesting lawn scraps to add to the pit. Within just a few hours, no less than 20 disgruntled residents were gladly offering their clippings. In fact, Daniel had enough to keep up the onslaught for 3 whole weeks before Pete and his wife finally complained. Politely, they asked that he stop using his fire pit because the stench was coming into their house through the ductwork and making everything stink. Acting surprised, Daniel commented on how it seems our actions can unknowingly affect the people around us. Then, twisting the knife, he reminded Pete that he should have no problem doing what they want in their own yard. The realization immediately dawned on both of them. Pete's face twisted in a scowl, but he stayed silent. His wife calmly said that she understood, and they wouldn't hear the Mustang anymore. After this, Daniel put out the fire, and lo and behold, never heard the Mustang again. I guess you could say Pete's massive ego went up in smoke. Be Amazed viewer Callum has also had neighbor troubles, although his are significantly stinkier. Despite not actually owning the space on the street outside his house, his neighbor would get wildly territorial over it, to the point that everyone on the street knew not to go near it. Well, one day Callum's friend drove over to visit and was struggling to park, until they saw there was one space left. They quickly slipped in and walked inside, unbeknownst to the fact that they'd just sealed their fate. Around 20 minutes later, the two men were chatting when Callum's face suddenly went white. He just noticed his friend had parked in none other than the angry neighbor's spot. Panicked, the friend raced back to their car and reached for the handle to get in, but as soon as they touched it, they knew something was horribly wrong. It was warm, wet, and slimy. Oh God, what could it be? They snatched their hand away and confirmed their worst fear. It was smeared with sloppy dog poop. Nobody could prove how it got there, but you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out who laid the duty trap. Ugh. And sadly, that's where the story ends, with Count Crapula getting his petty revenge scot-free. Moral of the story? Sometimes the bad guys get away with it. Even without the looming threat of poop traps, some so-called drivers still manage to completely bungle it. I mean, was this guy even trying to get between the lines? But don't worry, a chalk-wielding hero decided to line things up better for them and even left a thoughtful little message. Now that's passive aggression at its finest. Elsewhere, in Rostov, Russia, check out this example of communal unity after some douche decided to park their SUV on a grass strip. Wow. I'd have paid some serious moolah to see the owner's reaction. For those not fluent in Russian, the note on the door reads, "To the winner of Best Parking Attendant of the Year, the cup is yours." Presumably the cup is that toilet. However, my gold medal winner for the most passive-aggressive parking punishment of the video goes to this wooden DIY car cage. Scrawled across the board is "No parking means no bleepin' parking." It appears the driver of this smart car ignored the "no parking" sign, and enraged, some building workers blocked them in with their vans before constructing the cage. Now that's a woodshop project I can get behind. For Reddit user Retrack Terragram, though, it's far too tame. For 4 straight Halloweens, hooligans had driven their cars over the pumpkins outside his home, wrecking them. But on the 5th year, Retra had a sinister idea. Halloween was fast approaching, so he bought the biggest pumpkin he could find before filling it entirely with concrete. Then he put it outside his home and waited. Around 4 a.m., a loud crash rattled through the house from outside, and looking out his window, Retro saw a car tipped on its side with one of its wheels broken off. Clearly the plan had worked. Happy to know justice was served, he went to bed, which would be some serious revenge if it was real. Yeah, sorry guys, but in an edit made later, Retro revealed he'd made the whole thing up, which is a weird thing to do. But honestly, it's kind of a relief. Laying a trap like that sounds highly illegal. Don't worry though, the next insane tale is very real. Everybody deals with wrong number calls once in a while, but what if you had so many that it drove you insane? Reddit user Canadian Skeptic got a new number that had belonged to someone named Christine around 3 years back. He knew this because Christine clearly hadn't been bothered to update any of her contacts, meaning he received all of her calls instead. Debt collectors, old flings, family members, you name it. He ended up being contacted by them. Every time, he'd tell them this wasn't her number anymore and ask that they tell her to change it. And every time they promised they would, yet the calls kept coming. As time went on, this went from frustrating to infuriating. It was clear he'd need to find a more direct solution, so he decided that whenever he received texts confirming appointments of any kind, he'd wait until the last minute and then cancel them. Gynecology appointment? Canceled. Hairdresser booked? Not anymore. But somehow, after an entire year of terminating this woman's appointments, he was still getting unwanted messages. How had she not gotten the idea yet? Well, he was about to go nuclear. One day he got a text from Christine's boss asking about booking her in for a meeting. So, with a conniving smile, he did her a favor and texted back announcing her resignation. Oh boy! The boss responded with alarm, berating who he thought was Christine for being unprofessional. And that's when Skeptic told him to get Christine to change her number then. The next day, he got a furious text from none other than the woman herself. He simply responded, "Change your number, or I will keep canceling all your appointments." It was only then, after all this, that she realized why all her bookings were getting canceled for the last year. This lady really doesn't sound too sharp. She sent one more expletive-filled explosion of text, to which Skeptic responded with a single LOL. After that, he never heard from her again, or any of her contacts. It seems she finally got the message. And we've reached the end of the video. What was your favorite act of passive-aggressive vengeance? And if you have your own story, let me know either in the comments below or by email, and it might appear in the next episode. Thanks for watching.